You're watching the Eternal Tournament Series.
Hello and welcome to the Season 4 Invitational. I'm aReNGee and I'll be one of your casters for today. Joining me is LocoPojo.
Welcome, folks. Hope you're having a good day.
Yeah, so the Invitational is not the same as our regular weekly tournaments that you guys have been watching over the last couple weeks. It's an invite-only tournament that you get into by performing well in those tournaments. We invited 32 players through either winning a tournament, coming in a finalist, winning the last chance qualifier that we had last Sunday, or via the top 14 invitational points people, which ended up trickling down a bit because of people who couldn't show up. But there's been some last minute bracket changes. Master Bacon, one of our finalists, could not show up. So we previously had a tiebreak for the final position, and one of the tiebreak players has been swapped in. So we've got our final 32, and they're going to be playing a double elimination tournament today. The day one stream will go down until only 8 players remain, which is, I believe, after winner's bracket round 3 and loser's bracket round 4. So we've got 7 matches for you guys today, and then we'll be back tomorrow, Sunday, with the day 2 stream, which is all best of 5, and we'll be covering every single match there. So once we hit top 8, you guys won't miss anything. Everybody will get their time in the sun. The full rules are available at arengeeeternal.com/ETS/rules, which should be up on the screen if you guys want to check those out in detail. Now, we've also got a very special prize in addition to the regular invitational prizing. Of course, first place will take the regular $80 Champion Discord badge and a bunch of series points, but we've been able to get sign-off that much like with the event last week, the player who comes in first in this tournament will also be able to talk to Direwolf Digital and get a card to spoil from the new Omens of the Past set. So that's going to be very exciting. Second place will get $60 and 9 series points. Third place, $40 and 7. Fourth place, 20 and 5. Fifth and 6, 15 and 4. Seventh and 8th, 10 and 3. And these series points are getting more and more important because we have only 2 seasons left until World Championships. And if you want to win Player of the Year, you're going to need as many series points as you can get, because you need to go to Worlds to win Player of the Year. And that's something that a lot of people are involved in, including my co-caster here today, LocoPojo.
Oh, yeah. We've got plenty of invitational points, and we're trying to get up there as well, I think. So today, for you, we have a matchup between Ilunga and Quins. We're watching Stone Scar Sacrifice versus Felm Tempo. It's looking like a pretty exciting matchup. Ilunga's brought something pretty exciting today. We have a list full of Dark Wisps and Shadowlands Guides and Torrent of Spiders, all operating with Brimstone Altar to generate a lot of extra damage here, ticking Grenadins, pushing damage. You have torches and lots of just aggressive sort of different little things to peck at your opponent with while controlling the board with cards like Combust and Devour, and basically just setting up value over and over again along with Smuggler's Stash. This is a Callous-free list, so it runs a lot of aggressive stuff and a lot of sort of interesting sacrifice outlets, but it's mostly about plunking away for little bits of extra damage. A really interesting and exciting thing. We've seen Ilunga bring something like this before to previous tournaments, and we're going to see how well it does against the Felm Tempo deck.
Now, the Felon Tempo deck, on the other hand, is all about go, go, go. It's playing the cheapest efficient threats that it can. Most of them fly in, and it's just trying to get over the opponent and rush them down with pressure. It's not backing that up with burn, but rather with disruption. You've got your permafrost, your sabotages, your suffocates, just cheap ways to keep your opponent from blocking and keep them on the back foot. If they keep needing to play units to kill your units, they're not going to be able to develop their own board position, and they're really going to fall on the back foot quickly.
Yeah, this list is pretty interesting because it's one of the ones that runs 3 unstable forms. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do with unstable form in Felm Tempo, including morphing units that have been silenced, morphing your lurking Sanguars into very, very cheap 6-drops early in the game, popping Aegises, generally just using them as a toolkit card to do a lot of different tasks all at once, and just makes for fun games. So I'm looking forward to seeing this get a little bit of action in the Quins versus Ilunga matchup.
Yeah, I think it'll be a very interesting matchup because you know, the Stone Scar or the Sacrifice decks in general are all about gumming up the ground with a bunch of tokens and stuff and really slowing your opponent down. Whereas the Felon Tempo decks are trying to go, go, go. So it's sort of a, you know, an aggressive deck against sort of a more controlling one. Even if the Stone Scar Sacrifice deck doesn't usually play like the controlling deck, I think it's going to take the role in the face of the Felon Tempo deck's incredible aggression.
Yep, Felon Tempo decks tend to be very, very fast and quick. They also have a lot of good infiltrates that are pretty effective. I think a lot of this will come down to whether or not Ilunga can madness the appropriate targets. If he can hit cards like Midnight Gale or Lurking Sanguar and get some lifesteal off of them before sacrificing them to Devour, that'll be enough of a swing to help him stabilize for the early game and get set up for that late game continued just amount of plinkage. Ilunga's main problem is going to be that he's very, very good at gumming up the ground, but not so good at gumming up the air. It's a little bit tricky to deal with all of the flyers that Felon Tempo runs, so this could be a tough matchup for him in terms of how he's going to defend against the Twilight Raptors, the Whispering Winds, and Midnight Gales with Beast Colors amulets on top of them. He'll be able to deal with the big stuff very easily, but the little stuff, the Felon Tempo stuff that makes up the smaller parts of the deck, are pretty aggressive, and Argentport Instigators tend to deal a lot of damage back to these sacrifice decks.
Yeah, well, the other problem is that the Stone Scar Sacrifice decks really rely on getting a power advantage with all of their removal. You know, they use Combust on a 5-cost unit, and then they gain an advantage there, and they use their Suffocates, Annihilates, Madnesses, whatever. Using that on the little 1-drops and 2-drops that Felon Tempo is running is actually to the disadvantage of the Stone Scar Sacrifice deck because they're trading more resources to deal with the Felon Tempo cards, which is really where the Felon Tempo deck gets its advantage. You know, it's very efficient, and making the Stone Scar Sacrifice deck less efficient is going to give Felon Tempo the edge, I think.
Could be. I think it's a pretty interesting matchup. All right, so yeah, we have a team performance graphic to show to you guys, as well as the bracket for the tournament. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
So as always, we've got one of the premier Eternal teams, Team Vorprex, showing up with nearly all of their members. I believe only Rewind is absent. We've got Unearthly, Shed, Toth, Thundershot, Illunix, and Ilya K all making appearances here today. Team SPG, or Seek Power Gaming, is also present in force with Hythar, Kalimdir, Child Roland, I believe is a newer addition, and Bradykin all making an appearance. ET is the only team, or Elder Titans, sorry, is the only team that has a team deck. They're all here on Chalice Control today, which includes notorious aggro players Sarius and Manus, as well as Mr. Chalice himself, Moosh, and level 13 David. And finally, we have a new team formed by some relatively new players to the scene. Pretty recently, I think just last week, we've got Team BS, which I'm told stands for Baboon Squad. We'll see if that's actually true, which includes Tony G, too many E's, Tiger HC, and Maybe Next Time, which is misspelled on this sheet, actually, now that I look at it. It only has one T.
Yeah, Tony G in particular has made quite a splash in the last, I think, 2 invitationals. He won one and top 8 of the other with the Armory decks, in spite of people generally not thinking that Armory was good in best of 3. He's done very well in the tournaments, and we're looking forward to seeing how he does here in the invitational.
I suspect that you mean weekly tournaments, as he was not in the previous invitational tournament.
Right, the weekly tournaments, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, all 3 players on those teams are definitely up and comers, and they've been doing quite well. Tiger HC is a long-time ladder player that's moved over. Maybe Next Time has actually been killing it. Aside from Sarius and Unearthly, which 2 old standbys, he's 3rd on the list of invitational points, and had one of the breakout seasons here today.
There are a lot of strong players here today. I think level 13 David and Mono S are both standout players that we've seen a lot of good play from in general. They haven't necessarily scored highly in the tournaments, but their play has always been very solid. So I think it should be interesting to see how they do in the tournaments.
Yeah, we'll be checking in with these team performance graphs throughout the day just to see, how people are doing and stuff like that. A couple of times, so we'll be keeping track and we'll be seeing which team's performing the best. Obviously, Team VPX has the edge with their 6 players to the 4 or 3 of the other teams, but it will be interesting to see, how these players are doing. So I believe we're just going to look over the bracket quickly to just see who's playing against who and where all the matchups are just before we jump into our first round match.
Yes. I don't think I have that list up, aReNGee.
Oh, never mind. All this talk about bracket was just for show. All right, so we'll be telling the players to go then, and we'll be jumping down into our first match, which is Quincy versus Alunga, which happens to should be starting up just right now. Felon Tempo versus Stone Scar Sacrifice, the Alunga special.
Yeah, it should be pretty exciting stuff. We're looking at a lot of interesting plays and interesting cards from both players. Like I said, the Alunga deck is really kind of fascinating from a Stonescar Sacrifice standpoint. You see no Khalees in the main deck or in the sideboard. There's only 2 Oblivion Spikes, which is traditionally a very strong card in the Stonescar Sacrifice archetype. And on that same note, there's only 1 Smuggler Stash. So a lot of the really late game potential of this deck has been sort of nixed, and it's more focusing on the early game with cards like Ticking Grenadin to push extra damage and be a little bit more aggressive. I'm not sure if that strategy is going to work out quite as well against the Felon Tempo deck, but if you can get the appropriate Madness Combust combos and actually push damage consistently while getting rid of smaller threats, you can actually get a lot of value out of it. If there's any way for Alunga in particular to delay the Beastcaller's Amulet, and I'm not sure that there is in his particular deck, but if he can somehow stop the Beastcaller's Amulet from coming across, stealing that would be a really solid play for him.
Well, the players are off lightning fast, and we already see that Alunga has drawn the top end of his deck here. I know you talked about how he's playing a lot more early game, but he just can't draw a sigil for the life of him. Had a bit of an awkward redraw, and now it's just all Quincy all the way.
Yeah, we have activated Blood Beetle on the field already. Alunga's throwing his combusts at Argenport Instigators, but we've already seen the Beastcaller's Amulet coming down, so it looks like Quincy is already getting a really big advantage on the early board, and Alunga with only two power might be in quite a bit of trouble.
Yeah, that power was just a little too late, and then Ajinder Azaleo, just for the extra rubbins, gives your sort of rallies your entire field as his static effect comes out, and that was fast.
Yeah, it's a pretty rough game. It looks like that's a lot of damage in a very short period of time, and Alunga will be going down and getting knocked out for the first round.
So he's down a game, but we'll have to see if there's anything in his sideboard that can sort of bring him back. He does have a lot more of the early game removal, the sabotages to take care of the Quincy's removal, and specifically those Beastcaller's Amulets that you were talking about. Some Suffocate should be quite useful since everything's pretty small. Annihilates could come in. A lot of Quincy's stuff is multi-faction, so they wouldn't necessarily be they wouldn't have a 100% hit rate, but they could deal with something like the Lurking Sanguires or the beasts that come out of the amulets.
Basically, the Annihilates can be pretty effective. Umbran Reaper can certainly slow down your opponent's board quite a bit. Ilunga could try running the Plagues. They're not as effective against the Felon Tempo deck, since Felon Tempo is remarkably resilient to 1 health kill spells, but they can reduce the impact of large boards in some fashion, so it's potentially a decent plan for him. The tricky cards here in particular, cards that you really have to worry about, are Charchain Flail. It's a really good early removal card, but at the same time, it does suffer against decks that run both Argenport Instigator and cards like Annihilate, since you can Annihilate to kill a small unit and then hit the Charchain Flail in the process. It can be pretty rough.
Well, we're back down to the match, and Alunga's actually been able to draw some power this time around. and has the early suffocate for the Blood Beetle, so that's a little bit better. Not going to be too far on the back foot, but Quincy, he's got a lot of action in hand. Brought in the Plagues, of course, to deal with all of the 1/1s that Alunga's trying to present, and I'd say looks to be a bit favored right now.
Yeah, in particular, that Midnight Gale is a very strong card against Alunga's deck. If Alunga can't find a way to combust it or steal it, then it's just a little bit difficult to deal with that card with Annihilates. The Suffocates don't hit it either. He basically needs Torches or Combusts, and those are the only answers that really work effectively against Midnight Gale.
Now we see here Quincy drew an unstable form and really got to show one of the flexible options with unstable form in the deck. It basically gives you 2 cards to discard to Whispering Wind for action, which really allows Quincy to get all up and running. He's just going to have 100% action cards in hand, and he's unlikely to flood out with 2 Whispering Winds on the board.
Yeah, Echo cards have a lot of inherent value just as cards in hand for specific discard outlets. Cards like Herald Song and Whispering Wind both behave very well with them, so it's really interesting to see them being used in that fashion. And of course, this card is something that can be used to press aggression in other ways. It can be very effective. Quincy already sitting on the Plague, which is exactly what he needs against these smaller tokens, but he's looking for other units to basically set up a little bit better against the deck, and what he's found is a Lurking Sanguar, which isn't a bad choice at all.
Well, Alunga has the opposite problem from last game, where here he's drawn a little bit too much power and isn't quite able to make it work. And just these Whispering Winds are putting in a huge amount of work, making sure that Quincy can sculpt his hand to the optimal state, choosing actually to discard a Midnight Gale to go get a Sanguar.
Yeah, the more times you hit with Whispering Wind, the worse off it is. Just generally, the ability to shape your hand turns out to be very powerful in Eternal. And Whispering Wind, despite being a card neutral, even card disadvantageous card, tends to be very effective against a lot of decks. One of the key cards in Feln Tempo.
Well, Alunga does get to deploy his Oblivion Spike here, but I think it's going to be a little bit too late to really stem the bleeding. Quincy's in full swing, and while he has emptied his hand, his board presence is just a little bit too commanding, and Alunga's not sitting on an empty hand too.
Yeah, Oblivion Spike at least represents a life swing here. It's an extra 5 gained, and then he also gets to kill 1 unit. Combined with Ticking Grenadin, he's pushing a little bit more damage, but he's not going to win a life race with Lurking Sanguar and Midnight Gale on the prowl, so it's going to be a little bit tricky for him to come back from this.
Yeah, and he can chump this turn, but it looks like he's on a 2-turn flying clock and just has no cards left to answer. An Instigator might even take that down to a 1-turn clock.
Yep, there's a Rapid Shot in Quinn's hand, which is pretty potential lethal. He's got lethal in the air, and then with Instigator, it looks like he's just dead in the water.
So Alunga is super dead, and he is our first player to fall in the Invitational. Now, this is a double elimination tournament, so he will go down to loser's bracket and be able to battle it out from there, but it just, Stonescar Sacrifice, we talked about it having a reasonable early game, but it was nowhere near to Feln Tempo's just sheer go, 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 go.
Yeah, it can be a very rough matchup when you're dealing with so many small flyers. There are a lot of specific answers in Alunga's deck that are more focused on dealing with big units, with the Combre matchups, the larger Rakano cards that get weapons on them. You can do things like steal a card and then combust it to kill another card, and that tends to be very, very effective. There's a lot of unconditional single target removal in Alunga's deck, but not so much for wiping the opponent's board when the opponent is basically just presenting a lot of smaller mid-range units. And this is one of the big strengths of the Feln Tempo deck, is that it is a very aggressive deck that also happens to have just enough resilience to stay alive against decks that are more prepared against other types of aggro. It can be very, very tricky for certain decks to deal with, and it looks like Alunga will fall to that particular matchup.
Well, that's one of the disadvantages of being Stonescar, is that Fire has no spread removal at all, and Shadow's options are pretty limited. You've basically got Plague, and you've got Stray into Shadow. And Stray into Shadow would kill your whole board as well, so Not really something that Ilunga's going to want to tech in most of the time in Plague. It only hits X1 units, and the problem is that with Feln Tempo, unlike with some of the more fire-based aggro decks, it just doesn't play any X1s. There's nothing with one health to kill.
Yeah, Strange Shadow can be a very effective card in this setup. I actually think it is a reasonable sideboard inclusion, but it's a little bit tricky if you're looking for answers to some of the bigger stuff, which is what you generally expect in the slower tournament metas. You're looking for Combre decks, you're looking for Armory decks, you're looking for all of the big value stuff like Chalice and other stuff. When you end up seeing these aggro decks, they can take players by surprise. If you're not prepared for them, it can be pretty rough.
Yeah, and don't worry about that match being very fast. There's lots of matches still going on, and we are now moving to one of our backup matches, which is going to be Ilya K on Feln Control against Tatsumaki on Voda Combo.
Yeah, we're locked into game one, and looking at, of course, a 0-0 record. Ilya K versus Tatsumaki. Felon Control versus Voda Combo is a pretty interesting matchup. Basically, Voda Combo really needs to get that big combo off and just go off, whereas the Felon Control deck is trying to just keep the board stable and get those Champion of Cunnings to set up for the larger big turns.
Yeah, and of course, Control versus Big Combo is not a fast matchup, so we have time to come into those, even though we saw those two blistering fast matches. Now, Tatsumaki's got the better of the board here. He's got a number of threats that he can deploy, some flyers, but Ilya K fires back with the Champion of Cunning, which does demand an answer.
Yeah, he's got a pretty good setup on the current board, except for the fact that the Seraph appears to still be unsilenced, and that's a card that he really, really needs to kill. If he continues to hold out with his Champion of Cunnings, then he'll be able to set up some really lethal plays against flyers in the air, so that's something that's really worth considering, but he's still got to actually set up against that Seraph, and that Seraph provides him with a lot of extra value for Tatsumaki.
So Seraph is really good on a board stall, but Champion of Cunning's no slouch either. Rallying your units every turn is a very powerful effect, and with that Aegis, it is fairly difficult for Tatsumaki to shut down the Champion.
Yep, he's got two units that are just getting bigger and bigger. The Champion is going to be the biggest threat, but the longer he can keep it out, the better. Ilya's been very patient with this Black Sky Harbinger, using it he's planning on using it to clear out tokens and just set up for really big life swings at important times. I think it's reasonable to play it here since it buffs off of Champion, but there are also reasons to keep it in hand as sort of a clear spell.
The other problem with Seraph in this particular situation is that it's not a zero cost to using Seraph's ability. Tatsumaki has a lot of cards in hand that he would like to be able to deploy, but just rolling Seraph means that he can't have access to any of those cards, whereas Champion of Cunning is a free ability that activates just at the end of your turn. So Ilya K is actually able to play out all of his cards, whereas Tatsumaki needs to choose between activating or playing out his hand.
Yep.
Which
Ilya's
combo?
Pays off. He gets the Withering Witch into the Black Sky Harbinger, which is the total board clear. With Champion of Chaos still on board and the buff coming out for both the Black Sky and the Withering Witch, Tatsumaki's going to have a really hard time with this matchup. He'll draw a card off Mystic Ascendant. He'll be looking for a Vanquish or a Harsh Rule to clear this out. And if he can manage that, he's in good shape. But as it stands, it looks like he's dead. 2 flyers in the air.
So he could have played Combray Healer and survived 1 extra turn instead of playing that Seraph there. I don't have his list in front of me. This was a bit of a hot swap. Does Tatsumaki play any Harsh Rules? He does not. Okay, so Tatsumaki was very low on outs there. He would have needed to draw another Great Parliament and then stall for a while, so he was probably dead.
Yeah, there may not have been a good answer for him. I think the Combray Healer definitely would have been the better play just to try and draw into that Great Parliament. But it is a tricky setup, and he definitely needed something better. His outs, if he had played the Combray Healer, included Sandstorm Titan, Great Parliament, and beyond that, probably Valkyrie Enforcer might have done it, but it would have been pretty close. So there weren't that many ways that he could have recovered, and even those cards would only stabilize him. but still,
Mhm.
that may have been a small misplay on his part. So that is round 1 to Ilya K, and we'll be hopefully going into round 2 very shortly. Yeah.
Game 1. Game
Game
1
one.
of this best of 3.
Indeed.
So we have the deck list in front of us here, and the interesting part of Tatsumaki's list is that he's not playing just straight Voda combo. He's actually splashing Primal in the sideboard, which is something that he's done a fair amount, but probably won't come up too much in this matchup. It's mostly for Lightning Storms and Permafrost, just to give the Voda combo deck a bit more early defense against the various token decks. But it does mean that his sideboard is a lot more limited for something like this control matchup, because he is playing all of those Lightning Storms and whatnot.
Yeah, it's an interesting decision to splash the Wisdom and Primal directly into your deck along with Seat of Order. You have 4 Primal sources just in the deck in the main board, and then no Primal cards in the main board. It's all sideboard cards. Permafrost and Lightning Storm along with Rain of Frogs. So, like, this is something that you can do to get easier control over token decks and to have access to Rain of Frogs, which is a fairly powerful card against certain control matchups. But it does introduce some unreliability in your deck that you do have to deal with. Tatsumaki isn't too bothered by this because the Vodafone deck is already all about drawing tons and tons of power, so it can usually fix for everything it needs pretty well. But there's something to be said for that like minor tempo loss that you might get.
Well, these players are sideboarding quite fast, and they're actually moving into game 2. Just before we leave, I will note that the Ilya K sideboard includes a lot of high-value control cards, including stuff like Azendel's Gift, Celestial Omen, and even the Last Word, which is pretty good against Cambrai. So we'll see if those cards end up making their appearances. But we're into game 2, and we're not going to start off that fast.
Yeah, Ilya K looking at a 1-power hand with a Vara's Favor to fix if he draws the second. He could be in a lot of trouble here, but it looks like his keep pays off. Oh, he's actually got 2 power here. He just played the first one. So yeah, it looks like he will have the Vara's Favor and the Annihilate for the early game. He has access to Celestial Omen to pick out a Zindel's Gift or possibly the Last Word, which is just pulled into his hand. Unless Tatsumaki provides him with some pressure, Ilya K can run away with this game just by drawing power every turn.
Yeah, both of these decks aren't very fast out of the gate, and they're going to be happy just to be building up their power base. You know, Ilya K wants to get up to Vera and Last Word and Azendel's Gift, and Tatsumaki wants to get up to 8 power for Seraph and Parliament, like we've seen before many a time. As you said, though, if the game continues to go at the slow pace and Ilya K draws his power, I do give him the edge because Azendel's Gift is just such a crushing card.
Yep. And the Last Word is also quite effective at taking out those big dudes. At this point, however, Ilya has not continued to draw power. He's now looking at a Death Strike for the next big unit. And after that, he's not really good on plays. He doesn't have much to do for his next couple of turns beyond draw Celestial Omen and play Gift. Tatsumaki is at the point where he's starting to present real threats. The 4/4, the 5/5s, and the Mystic Ascendant all actually beat down, so he's going to have a hard time dealing with all of these units at once.
Yeah, Ilya K's stumble is really hurting him because Martial Ironthorn lets Tatsumaki just jump up straight to 7 power, and then he's going to be able to get that Mystic Ascendant online. And even after Ilya K has removed both of those, he's still pretty far away from casting any of his 8 or 9 drops.
Yeah, Ilya picks up the seat. He does have the possibility of drawing an undepleted power next turn, which will allow him to Omen. But what to Omen for is actually an interesting question. Withering Witch here is not a terribly effective play. It reduces the strength of the Mystic Ascendant, but then the Mystic Ascendant simply gains that health back, meaning it becomes immune to any surprise draws of Black Sky Harbinger. And Ilya's just really looking for his 6th and 7th power, but he also needs to draw units and spells to deal with the threats on board, which means that he's kind of presented with 2 different problems that he can't solve.
I think you play Withering Witch there instead of Podcaster. You're basically priced into chumping here anyways, and the Witch is a 1/1 chumps just as well, but it does bring down the Owl to a 4/1 permanently, which makes it a little bit easier to remove if you draw Vera's Favor or the aforementioned Black Sky Harbinger.
Yep, he gets the Withering Witch down now pretty easily, and that'll set him up with 6 power. Playing the Film Banner first belies any sort of fun trick, but it's not like he has the power to cast one anyways. So From here, he's just kind of dead on board, but he might be able to recover a little bit.
Yeah. Obviously, Tatsumaki is crushing this game at the moment. It'll be interesting to see whether he decides to play that second Mystic Ascendant or just save it in case the worst case scenario happens. Decides to roll Seraph. Interesting.
It's an effective tactic if you're looking to continually press advantage on the board. Against a Felon control deck, that can be a little bit trickier because playing out the Seraph just means that you are more vulnerable to a Zindil's Gift later. Ilya throwing 2 Wisdom of the Elders just to find power. He does find it, but that is the game. So we're now 1-1, and we'll be going into game 3 very shortly.
So we did say that Ilya K had a lot of high-cost cards that he could bring to bear, but the issue with that is that, unlike the Voda combo deck, the Feln deck does not have nearly as reliable power. So it has a lot more difficult time of building up to those 8 and 9 drops. Just because of the sheer lack of power searchers. That's something that Time does very well, and while Shadow has a lot of ways to kill units, it has a lot fewer ways to actually go look for things.
Yeah, there are 31 sources of power in Ilya's deck, 4 Seeks, 2 Eilins, and 3 Varas, and that's pretty close to the amount that you need to generate reliable power. But Ilya stacked his deck. He put 2 Channel the Tempests in, he put the Azindil's Gift in, as well as the Celestial Omen and the Last Word. He cycled in no less than 4 big cards, and I believe he held on to the Varas and the Black Sky Harbingers. So from there, it's actually pretty tricky to continue to balance out. It's possible that Ilya got rid of the Black Sky Harbingers for other things, but even then, he's still sitting on a lot of 8 and 7 drops, and that's a little bit tricky against the film decks, which do have a mid-range component that has to be dealt with.
I don't think you keep in the Witches if you cut the Harbingers.
Yeah,
it's not like you're. I assume the Storms came out.
Yeah, the Witches are pretty effective if you have Storm, but unless you're running the Witches and the Storms together, you don't really have the board clear that you're looking for. The board clear on film control decks is a little bit tricky, so yeah, I don't know. I think that overall he's just a little top-heavy, and it looks like we are already in Game 3, so going on the next round. Ilya has Death Strike for Sandstorm Titan.
Wow.
No way to deal with the Seraph.
Was not interested in going for the Witch Harbinger line. Looks like he's really interested in setting up for the Azindil's Gift as quickly as possible, and our speculation before was kind of useless as we see a Black Sky Harbinger sitting in hand as we speak.
Yeah, this Steward of the Past is... Oh, bit of a misplay from Ilya there. Throwing Rain of Frogs before Vara's favor means that he misses his power drop for the turn.
Yeah, that's actually going to end up costing him quite a lot because it's going to slow his development by at least a turn, maybe more, and really limit his options for what he can do.
Ilya, considering picking up the Protect here, he can easily morph the Vodafone Temple Speaker or the Mystic Ascendant, but getting either one means that he will have to deal with the other one with a Protect on it. I think Mystic Ascendant is probably the pick here, since that's the card that will play down and have the Protect up, whereas Vodafone is a slower play that doesn't really give him a lot of value, but he takes the Protect instead.
I think he's really hoping to get that gift down so that he doesn't need to deal with any of those cards, but because of the Vera's favor misplay there, I feel like he might be compounding his difficulties a little bit.
Yeah, he's in a decent amount of trouble if he can't continually play power every turn. That's the thing that you really want to do as a film deck against the Combre setup. That mid-range style is just pretty tough to beat if you aren't playing power every turn and getting up to that late game as soon as possible, because the Combre deck will ramp to that later game. It's not as strong as the film later game in some situations, but if you don't have the right answers to all of the threats, then building a board turns into building a hand with cards like Seraph and cards like Mystic Ascendant.
Yeah, and now he's basically all in on the top deck of power strategy. Interesting that he decided to go for the Seek Power rather than using the Vera's favor, as Seek Power could more naturally set up his plays this turn.
He doesn't play a Zindel's Gift this turn. He could Vara's into Withering Witch, and it looks like he does go for that. Mystic Ascendant, and then sets him up for a decent run against everything on the board. He's still got problems with the Owl, but his Black Sky Harbinger solves the board state, and his Azindel's Gift solves the hand state. The question is, which one do you do first, and how much pressure can you generate?
And Seraph is live, so we're going to get, oh, well, just a Temple Scribe today. So that's not really anything that Ilya K needs to worry about. So he may actually have stabilized himself.
Yeah, I think he's looking pretty good at this point. Vodaken's going to come down, and he doesn't have a great answer to Vodaken, but he can Azindel's Gift, and at that point, whatever Vodaken's drawing is only going to be one card every turn. So he can Celestial Omen for an answer to Vodaken after, and from there, he might be golden. It's just a matter of whether or not he can stay alive on board as Vodaken fires off.
Well, Tatsumaki's going to have a fair amount of gas to back up this Vodacon, even after the gift that we assume is coming down here. There's going to be 2 Vodacons on board, and
it's the turn.
Looking for a Celestial Omen.
Yeah, it looks like he's omening for a Death Strike against Vodaken, and then he's going to his Azindel's Gift. It definitely means that he will have a better board state, but now he's still dealing with Tatsumaki drawing gas every turn and having at least 5 cards in play that are of significant value.
So some more sequencing questions for Ilya K. If he played Gift this turn, first of all, it would have activated, and second of all, he would have had power to Omen plus Death Strike next turn. Whereas here, if he Omens, he can't Death Strike plus Gift. So a little bit more questionable, but Tatsumaki just has, I mean, all the 1/1s aren't much, but he's got a Parliament he can play. He can play Vodacon, Rain of Frogs, won't pop through the Aegis, but elects to just hold on to everything for the moment. I think Tatsumaki's definitely in the driver's seat here.
Yeah, Ilya picks up the Death Strike. That does get rid of the Vodaken, and Ilya is once again stable on board, but Tatsumaki still has a handful of cards, and we'll see exactly how that hand works out. Great Parliament is a big threat now that Vodaken has triggered, so he's just going to have a hard time dealing with all of those Owls. Like, it's a tough situation here. Tatsumaki already has all of the power he needs to start generating real threats. Ilya's big answers here are Azindel's Gift, and that means that he is just going to be stable on board. But you have Owls, you have basically Tatsumaki has 5 cards that are guaranteed to be value. Those include the Vanquish, they include a second Vodaken, which Tatsumaki would really like to play right here. And it's also got Mystic Ascendant, which is a card that is just absolutely bananas in this situation.
So Withering Witch is part 1 of the solution, but again, we see Ilya K just 1 power off from being able to do what he wants to do. And actually, this board is going to crash in for a whole bunch of damage. You're going to take 11 minus the 3.
Yeah, he gets 3 back, so he's not in an awful situation here. If he draws Black Sky Harbinger, he probably wins, but beyond that, he's not in great shape. 11 damage, or 11 power means that he can Witch and Black Sky Harbinger together, but I think he's let Tatsumaki's hand stay in Tatsumaki's hand for too long, and as a result, Tatsumaki's been able to build a really significant board.
Oh, well. It looks like Ilya K is going to get the last word, but Tatsumaki's going to have the last laugh on this game, as that was not the greatest Black Sky Harbinger draw of all time. And Tatsumaki's going to take this one.
Valkyrie Enforcer set up. We have Mystic Ascendant and the others crashing in as the Black Sky Harbinger and Steward remain silenced on board. I think that Tatsumaki played very well that game, and it looks like it paid out very well for him.
Yeah, usually the Feld control decks are able to, sort of control the board with Azindel's, or control the hand with Azindel's Gift and the board with its various removal spells. But Ilya K just in that second game wasn't able to get up to Gift power, and then in the third game had to deal with the board too many times to be able to really stop Tatsumaki from building up a hand, and then just got too far behind by the time that Gift came down that he wasn't able to deal with, Tatsumaki just spitting his hand on the board.
Yeah, if you set yourself a turn behind against a Combre deck, that can be very, very rough for you because you're looking for the turn 7 and turn 8 are typically the turns that are starting to really matter. But at the same time, if you're not getting to those turns as fast as your opponent is, like the Combre decks do not control the board. They generate mid-range threats to build threats on the board. So you really need to have your answers lined up and ready for those cards. And Ilya made a clear sequencing error with Vara's favor early on. He lost a turn to that. His Azindil's Gift might have cost him a turn as well. And from there, just a little too far behind, a little too little, a little too late.
So obviously we can't know if it would have been different, but the sequencing error didn't do any favors, that's for sure. So that is round 1 is just about wrapping up. So we're going to go to a quick break, and then we will be back for you guys with round 2.
Yeah, we'll see you guys then.